Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on leveraging AI to bring contracting into modern times. One of the hottest topics in contracting today is how to make contracting a competitive advantage to get the most out of your contracts while making the contract process a real differentiator for your business. It used to be that people think about getting more revenue or cost reductions when considering the benefits of contracting. Today, it's all about mining data in your contracts to help to drive faster and better business outcomes. That's where technology and automation comes in. My name is Peggy Barber. I'm the IACCM Regional CEO for the Americas. I'm happy to welcome Arthur Raguette, Executive Vice President of Ultria, to share his perspective on the value of technology to the contracting process. Arthur, would you get us started by introducing yourself and Ultria to our audience?
Peggy, thank you very much. And my name is Arthur Raguette. I'm a founder and vice president for Ultria, and we develop and license enterprise contract lifecycle management solutions. So several of you have probably heard us before. I think this is a very exciting topic, and it's based on a lot of questions that we're getting from our customers, as well as the market overall, which is really, how does an organization take its, I'll say, heritage, because it just sounds so much nicer than legacy, contract repository, contract tome, if you will, and optimize the existing information to help transform the business on a go-forward basis. Basically try to convert these file cabinets or drive shares or folders from space takers into business metrics. So maybe we'll just sort of start off on a somewhat lighthearted note. And what are the top 5 signs that your contracts are being treated like ancient history, somewhat ignored, if you will? One of the first things is after contracts are signed, they end up in shared folders someplace, shared drives someplace, never to be seen from again, possibly in a file cabinet, or even, worst case, in bankers' boxes. We'll come back to that later in a poll just to see where you may keep some of yours. Is it only at the time of a customer audit or a supplier audit that your old contracts are being reviewed? The third sign, do you have absolutely no way to monitor or measure current contract performance? And do you have zero or near zero visibility into the life cycle for your contracts, meaning upcoming expiry, or whether there's renewal dates pending, or even if these are evergreen? And last but not least, is finding agreements still a challenge? Now, I realize that as we've spoken to each of you before, that there's a limit to maturity, and there are different ways that we can look at where we all are on this sort of journey or path towards increased CLM adoption and use. But right now, let's get a quick level set as to your current status for the folks that are on our call today. So how modern is your contract management process? A, contracts are kept in cabinets and shared folders, and they're dug out during audits. B, contract files are managed in a DMS, or a document management system, or some kind or some sort of electronic repository. Or C, contracts are fully or truly digitized, which means you can search through them for phrases and clauses, and they are linked or integrated with your operational platforms, your ERPs or your CRM platforms, to track obligations and, more importantly, fulfillment or entitlements against those obligations. So again, the poll will stay open for another few seconds. A, contracts are kept in cabinets, whether they're electronic or physical. B, contract is stored in a document management platform with some limited type of repository. Or C, contracts are fully digitized, searchable, and integrated with your operational platforms for obligation and fulfillment management. Let's give you guys a minute or two, and then mark it. If memory serves me, when you present those polls, I have absolutely no idea what those polls say, so I might ask Peggy to give me the summary.
Okay, um, so Arthur, it's weird because I think the
Yeah,
questions that you asked are different from the ones that are showing.
yeah, he went and changed it on me.
Oh,
No?
okay.
Okay. So what questions did you think we asked? Because this is the same presentation I saw on Friday.
Okay, flexible, adaptable, I think is how we are, Art. So
We are.
the poll said post sign off, are your contracts tucked away in computer folders or worse in cabinets? So the vast majority of folks, 95%, they are in computer folders, 5% in cabinets. And I will throw in my 2 cents worth that that there are, based on where I've seen them, there were a lot more in cabinets, but certainly our audience is actually very much into this area, so I can see that certainly there's a lot higher percentage in computer folders and not as much in cabinets, thank goodness.
But
So
when we look at, let's say, the document management system, is there a category for electronic repository or DMS?
not in the poll.
Okay, then.
The poll just
So,
had those two questions. Is that right, Mark? Do we have
Yeah,
did I just
nope,
miss?
that was the copy that I
fine.
got.
Okay, so it sounds like we certainly see a trend towards the more contemporary, and let's make sure that we check that second poll later on.
Yes.
So why does it matter in today's day and age that we are doing what we can to transform and to capture more information about the contracts that we have? Now, fundamentally, there are just common trends that we see, and if I look at some of them, the first one is almost overhyped. If I'm walking down the streets here in Princeton, and someone says they can't find a good cup of coffee, it's very likely that their associate will say, "Well, it's because of globalization." We just sort of take it for granted that this is some kind of a broad transformation. I think the reality for us in the contract management field is that globalization has introduced a sea change away from centralized contract management. 30 years ago, it may not have been particularly fast or particularly elegant, but you could pretty much guarantee that contracts would end up somewhere. And we had things like file clerks and librarians who managed these troves of nearline or offsite storage. But at least they were in one place and may have been awkward and hard. Now, increasingly, just because of, well, globalization, operations are being distributed globally. The needs of the global economy are certainly different. Terms, conditions, pricing structures, methods of doing business are so dramatically different that we have, over time, I think, left contract management near the edge of the organization that has to deal with the external party. And in many ways, I'm a huge fan. I think most of us are. But what it does do is create a little bit of an inaccessibility challenge. So the documents are remote, they're stored differently, they're stored in different systems, they're organized and hierarchically named differently. And it really takes a lot of work to be able to mine and to gather and to maybe harmonize this information across the disparate environments. This does, just by default, create opportunities for knowledge drop, for gap, and in many ways, untraceable leakage. Contracts themselves, I think, today are certainly more dynamic than ever. I mean, we often hear about folks, sort of hyping out on blockchain or smart contract agents, which, believe me, have some great uses in certain kinds of high velocity or high volume commodity oriented businesses. But even for that 80% of our typical contract load, prices change, market influences change, supplies change. Adding to that, the regulatory and clause requirements that are changing. The fact that our contracts change so frequently means that we need to have a snapshot at all times of the in effect view of any given contract across the various amendments, versions, rewrites, redos, and that we're able to pull that from our archives easily and quickly. Now, certainly, and Brexit is going to be a great example. I'm sure we've got lots of folks from Europe, provided that they've hung out for a late afternoon call with us, biting their teeth, or biting their nails rather, is government regulations, whether they're environmental or financial controls or simply industry best practice or just internal compliance regulations are constantly changing. And there's a tremendous need to be able to go in and identify what contracts are now putting us at risk that were not perceived as risky when they were first executed, simply because the climate has changed. And not unrelated to globalization, but certainly sort of an overall summation, large organizations have multiple systems where contracts live. I've got sourcing contracts in my procure-to-pay platform or my RFP or my auction platform. I've got contracts for high volume, maybe low value deals stuck inside of my CRM platform, whether it's Salesforce or Dynamics or something homegrown or extended from my ERP. I've got operational data contracts stuck inside of my enterprise asset platforms, my HR platforms for contingent labor. Bringing all of this together, understanding what a total risk profile may look like, has just become an increasingly more difficult challenge. So all the more reason, before it gets too much more out of control, that maybe we want to take this and start figuring out how to add order to the chaos, how to bring both speed and control to this kind of challenge. Now, often people think of speed and control as being opposites. How many times have you had your team referred to by a salesman under his breath as the Revenue Prevention Society, right? It's just adding extra cycles to go through an agreement or a contract. Yet, with control, you can move faster. So control used well, sort of like putting bumpers up for a child's game of bowling, guarantees that you go a little bit smoother, a little bit faster. You go faster with more control. Or, for those of you in the audience today who have a tendency to drive European sports cars or sports sedans, you're much more comfortable zipping down the freeway than you might be in a beat-up station wagon. So, turning contracts into modern metrics for post-award. That's quite a mouthful. What we're really talking about is taking advantage of the assets you already have and being able to leverage those, to mine them, to learn from them, to understand what kinds of control have worked well so that you can apply that control to your current process and, as and when possible, speed up that process. And in just as valid a way, be able to extract metric and milestones to better manage the performance of the parties involved against the contracts. Because after all, the contracts are the source of truth of the relationship between multiple parties. And if we can overcome our past behavior of leaving them stuck in a shared drive or a common folder or, God forbid, a banker's box or filing cabinet, we'll see how we can leverage this information on the go forward. We ran a survey last year, and the percentage of compliant contracts was identified as the very important metric for contract management teams. Twice the number of folks had voted for that as their top choice as compared to the reduction in contract author cycle time. Yet, according to McKinsey, 75% of today's contracts lack key performance indicators and calculations for total cost of ownership. So while it may be the goal of most of the people on today's call, the raw assets are still lacking some of the base measures for metrics and milestones. So how do we get our arms around this? How do we convert this legacy? Well, first is to understand that you need to. So let's make use of the tools at our disposal, right? Leverage your customizable dashboards for visibility. Leverage your BI capabilities. I mean, this happens to be an Ultria dashboard, but understanding what compliance looks like. Compliance to the process, compliance to the law, compliance and to your obligations, to your entitlements. Each of these is a different aspect of compliance. Just as importantly, as we look at how to improve our sort of vast asset that's out there, how do we ensure at the same time that things that are new, things that are being processed every day, are going to be able to add value to the organization on the go forward? This is really a matter of ensuring that the right kinds of metadata, data about the contract, and this could include key terms, could include key clauses. You know, what kind of limitation or liability clause do we have? What kind of outbound indemnification do we have? How do we capture this at the onset? And in many ways, capturing at the onset can be beneficial in some of your other key process improvements as a contracting organization. So let's use robotic process automation, right? The intelligent smart wizard, whether it comes through Microsoft's Outlook plugin, or it's coming through a supplier portal or a customer portal through CRM, or even just an intranet tied to legal.iaccm.org that allows folks within your organization to enter these requests for contracts. And in general, leverage your sort of RPA approach to use the metadata to create a best first draft. Understand the template, bring in the appropriate clauses, generate the right paper, and depending on the nature of the complexity of the deal and its use of internal versus external paper, generate a best first draft that can then move forward. Now, once the draft is in process, let's remember that this is the right time also to add milestones, to set triggers and alerts to ensure that key metrics, if they're not inherent within the written text of the contract or capturable from your operational systems, more on that in a slide or two, that you're able to provide a framework to have the right people enter the right information, because you want to be able to search for this information later. Right? And what's the old adage that most of us were told, right? Measure once, measure 3 times, cut once, get the data right the first time. There's always time to do it right. There's never time to do it over. Let's learn from those kinds of things and ensure that we're populating our data correctly at the onset, leveraging the technology at hand so that you can, downstream, very quickly and easily search for things, use your metadata to refine that search, to narrow down. This is also especially true if you're looking at e-discovery process. And then being able to connect these robust contracts with good metadata to your enterprise platforms, your ERPs, your supplier relationship platforms, your CRM platforms, and do this in order to be able to capture operational data that can be compared against the system of record, i.e. the contract. Being able to provide and assign responsibility for review as well as supplemental data entry to the key shareholders facilitates accurate milestone and accurate metric capture. With this information, you're able to monitor and track trends in performance. Could be your sales team's performance or your delivery team's performance to your customers. It may be the performance of a supplier of services or a provider of goods. Now, another fundamental capability is the ability to manage in a post-award, post-signing environment whether your clauses are still the right and appropriate clauses. So here I refer mostly to things like GDPR, right? The new California Data Privacy Standard, environmental controls, regulatory controls, identifying embedded lease obligations, ensuring that all contracts met the revenue recognition requirement language that your team has now put into place. So be able to mine contracts for clauses that may be questionable or need to be updated, and facilitate either the replacement of those in an amendment form, or outright edit, redline, and identification of a manual amendment process. With that same base framework, we have the capability to identify and update at all times the various risk levers for your contract repository. So it could be as something as simple as rebalancing which clauses are deemed risky on a particular contract based on a comparison of that contract's language with your now preferred clause or template or playbook. And that's something where artificial intelligence plays a huge role. The ability to read and to interpret and to provide a probabilistic match to identify whether you're still sort of in the bumpers, if you're in the range, or whether this contract clause has started to exceed your allowable risk level. And to have the software determine and present this within an aggregate risk environment. To be able to identify and act on contract task risk that has changed since the original contract was written is a marvelous way to ensure that you minimize your exposure in the future. In addition to clause level risk, we often see how past performance of a customer, of a contingent employee, of a supplier, how their past performance can be measured against the goals of the contract, and then calculate their performance derivation and whether or not they are considered, let's say, a good customer or a bad customer. Having this information within the contract management function, not just the contract management platform, the solution, the system, but within the organization, can help you become sort of a champion of change. And not that many people like that word change, except for us who are in this space. But armed with the right information, you can go to other key stakeholders and make a very clear argument for contract word change, clause curation, better use of template library, or taking it to the next level, how learning from your past contracts can improve your current performance as a business unit, not just in areas of reduced risk, but also identification of more ideal commercial terms. Within your own process, within contract management or contract administration, being able to show in very direct ways, and this is something, of course, that a contract lifecycle solution provides, being able to identify contract management cost reduction, compliance management increase in terms of identification of non-compliant prior to, let's say, audit or prior to a best practice review. And then ultimately, for those of you who are either on the sell side or the buy side contracting, either increase to revenue or reduction in actual out-of-hand cost through third parties, either through rebate or performance analysis, performance measurement. And yes, we can still look to demonstrate how a reduced cycle time can improve overall performance and sort of shake that revenue prevention mantra off of our back. I have another poll. I'm showing it on screen. I'm really hoping that Mark has the same poll. Mark, before we call the poll, am I close?
Yeah, this time they matched me.
Excellent. We gave some extra time to the poll, guys. We're all good. So, the poll is now open. Which of the following metrics are most important for your organization to track? A, contract performance metrics like delivery timelines, renewals, obligation management. B, contract utilization metrics, percentage utilization, payment term utilization. Or C, contract compliance metrics, risk analysis, percentage of regulatory compliance, non-compliance, etc. So A, performance metrics. So these are performance metrics about the other party. B, contract utilization, whether in-house is using the contract to their most full extent. Or C, contract compliance, is the contract itself doing a fine job of measuring risk, reducing risk, and ensuring regulatory compliance. We'll hold the poll open for another 15 or 20 seconds. And we're sharing them now. Once again, if I would be so kind as to ask Peggy to share and interpret.
Okay, so it looks like a little over 50%, 54% of the respondents said that the performance metric are most important for your organization to track, with 7% utilization metric and 39% in compliance.
Wow, so slightly more than half for performance of the other party. And then almost 40%, if I recall that number, 39% for contract compliance.
Exactly. It's an interesting split.
Now, if we had gone back, Peggy, 2 years ago, would you think that we'd see the same thing, or would the percentage for compliance be less?
I think the percentage for compliance would probably be a little bit less. I think that that's certainly something that is on the rise, and we've seen on the rise. I'm sure you have as well.
Absolutely. I am very surprised, though, by the small percentage for contract utilization. That may point to not having a lot of folks who are taking their operational systems and comparing them against their contract values very often. Huh. So I like that output very much. Just a little bit of an advert. I think we'll be giving back some time for these folks today, though I'm sure we have a bunch of good questions. Ultria, as I mentioned, we develop and license enterprise contract lifecycle management software. And we take that pretty seriously when we say lifecycle. So we provide support for everything from the initial request to have an agreement written through the renewal or final close of the contract itself. Providing this full support over the overall life cycle in very broad terms helps organizations get the most value out of their contracts. For those of you who have heard us talk before, it's not just about leveraging the repository and the authoring to get a contract written and in place. And it's not always about shortening that cycle. You know, if I took a month out of a 5-month cycle, that's great, 20% reduction. But that contract itself may run for 5 years, or 10 years. So let's make sure that the contract stands the test of time and that you can manage that contract, including, down to clause level specifics for that duration, especially true of your more complex or higher value or longer lifespan contracts. Artificial intelligence for us drives a couple of key things, and I'll just touch on these very lightly and we'll jump into questions and answers. What we find is RPA, or robotic process automation, at the intake allows us to limit the kinds and number of questions that a user has to fill out in order to generate a best first draft. Our math and research shows that if we have more than 8 steps, people abandon and immediately revert to email, phone calls, or God forbid, tapping you on the shoulder in the hallway. Right? But if we can keep that sort of steps down to 5 or 6, maybe 7, we have very, very high user adoption, and it reduces the back and forth of the initial request. By providing oversight using the AI engine and having it bolted into the authoring framework, we can provide automatic version setting, automatic saves, and a very secure cloud-based environment that provides an easy-to-use platform where the AI assists, not replaces, the legal professional. So it normally parses or reads contract terms and identifies higher risk or a higher variant of third-party paper against your own in a predictable and consistent way. So with that, I'm going to leave the summary page up, and let's see what kind of questions we may have.
Well, so Arthur, I think one of the first questions is, with the clients that come to you, what are the biggest gaps that they are typically trying to cover through a CLM system?
What I find is it's probably twofold. And on the first scenario is probably the easiest. Transparency and visibility in the generation process.
Yep.
What they're typically trying to do is streamline the process of best first draft generation, internal negotiation and review, and sort of getting it out the door. They're in that pre-award mode, and almost to a one, that seems to be their big challenge. They're looking to automate as much as they can without alienating their stakeholders, and to do that through a more refined intake process, and then enabling their legal staff, those folks who are doing agreement redlining and the like, to be able to work in a tool set that is comfortable for them. In our case, we empower a Microsoft Word plugin so that counsel or the legal team does not necessarily have to come in and come out or check in and check out, but simply click on a link, open the doc in Word, and run through their red lines, and we manage the back end of that. Even to the point where if someone changes a clause, we'll notify the clause owner that there's an additional review step. So we streamline that, I think, incredibly well. And that's probably 70% of the request areas that we see. The 30% is increasingly more related to getting value out of the contract repository of either their own organization or an organization that they have either recently acquired or that they're considering acquiring. And this is where the AI engine, from a parsing perspective, is more of a batch or a bulk approach. So that if we can read through 30,000 agreements in the course of a few days and generate a hit list of which contracts may be worthy of a hands-on or a rolled-up sleeves review, that provides a certain value to and of itself.
It's a fantastic value. Having gone through the separation of HP 3 times and trying to figure out how to decide what to look at, what I should care about, it was priceless. I mean, just in terms of the data that you can get and the speed at which that data can come. It's actually a lifesaver, at least based on my experience.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I think people look at AI, and I realized the image I think I had up on a prior slide was some sort of digitized head with bright lights touching a key nerve points. We're not talking about having the engine, having the software do the thinking for us. What AI does in an applied sense, and we're huge fans. We've been working in the applied AI space for a better part of a decade. Its job is to learn from good behavior and then identify bad behavior in patterns. So we use machine-based learning to teach the software. Here's what a good, just pick a sales agreement. Here's what a good sales agreement should look like. It should have these clauses. These clauses should be worded like this. Software, remember this. Look for things that are similar. And when you find things that aren't so similar, I want you to let us know. So, as we're probably in our third revision now of our AI engine for contracting, and it's identifying missing clauses or clauses that have been, how to say this politely, inadvertently misnamed so that if a human were reviewing, they wouldn't realize this was an indemnification clause. And being able to read the clause or the paragraph wording and identifying it as, this happens to be a force majeure or whatever the clause type is, regardless of how the attorney may have crafted it to begin with. So,
That's
we're
great.
finding really great use in a lot of very interesting use cases.
Fantastic. So, follow-on question there then, in terms of use cases, are there, contracts that, you know, I guess the question is what sort of contracts are best suited for your systems? Are there any that just are not a good fit?
Well, yeah, that's a great
Or is it
question.
all based on training and what you're willing to train it? So,
Perfect. So I would actually separate that too then. So there's, the system in terms of just the AI components for being able to read through an agreement. To that extent, any agreement that is predominantly text is a good candidate. And we've trained, I don't know, I think we're a little over 1.9 million clauses have been put into our engine to teach it how to read other contracts. Places where we do occasionally see a bit more of a challenge are contracts that are heavy on CAD or CAM engineering docs, for instance. Right, things that are really not words to begin with is probably the one area that we've seen some less than great performance. So being able to track variance across engineering diagrams,
yeah.
not a good fit. But for most English, absolutely. And then from an RPA perspective, from an intake and overall process, we find that just as adept at doing a 2-page NDA that's on corporate paper with no changes, generate a best first draft, heck, send it right out to the other party if everyone has their approval and wait for an e-signature. I mean, very much a hands-free implementation. Or if you're a Salesforce shop and you're generating an incremental sales order or just fresh agreements, let the Salesforce let Salesforce generate the input data for a contract. We'll generate the contract, send it out, get sales manager to review it, push it out the door, minimize the amount of hands that have to touch it. Or if you're writing a 400-page merger agreement, you've got a larger legal team. The use case is a little bit different, but you're going to make heavy use of the collaborative engine. And that's not just sort of me saying, hey, you should use it all the time. We're just finding really good use cases. The places where we haven't have really been on the large capital project builds. You're trying to build a $4 billion tunnel across Sea of Bosphorus. Not going to work for us.
Any language that you're using today other than English or developing toward?
That's a great question. From a UI and data perspective, the core CLM is multilingual. We support 15 languages, 3 come out of the box, English plus 3. From an AI perspective, we are currently looking to build the engine out to understand Canadian, French, and Brazilian Portuguese.
Interesting.
It's simply a matter of the world. There are places that we do business where you would think contract language would be local, but it's not. So the user interface to the tool, the portal, the request, even the contract data, right? Parts of that may be in other languages. But oftentimes what we come back to is the contract itself is written in English. So French and Portuguese are two, specifically Brazilian Portuguese, are two that we are currently expanding our AI capabilities for.
Okay, great. You talked earlier about the need to perform effective risk assessment of contracts by looking at and relating to previous performance. How do you go about doing that?
And that's, if we look at, let's say, at the Gartner maturity model, I mean, we're looking at like steps 4, steps 5 in CLM maturity. To be able to pull and synchronize, so to speak, operational data with your contract data. So if I've got a service provider and they're going to provide, pick something simple, network services for my 10 of my remote locations, there's an SLA or a service level agreement for the percentage of uptime and maybe the bandwidth. That same provider gives me a report at the end of every month to say how much his network has been up and what percentage and how their bandwidth has been on a day-over-day basis. Use that information, compare it against the obligations of the contract, right? The obligations were 98% uptime, 100 megabytes per second throughput. Did that vendor meet those requirements for each month of the last 12? Yes or no? You can have a light integration where your milestone says that Arthur has to enter this information, or it can be tightly coupled if I have a lot of these key suppliers or key customers, as the case may be. And I can pull that directly from my ITSM platform or from my CRM to see how I'm performing. And then push out exception reports. We've done work where we've actually generated rebate requests.
Okay.
So from a risk perspective, you're able to establish performance history for any given obligation and whether the other party has lived up to their obligations or entitlements in case there were payments associated. Straightforward metric tracking, and then roll that up into what you might call a risk scorecard. So we see maybe 5 or 10 common risk dimensions, and then our customers are generally taking those that make sense for them and creating a weighted risk scorecard, simple red, yellow, green, with the ability to drill down into actual contract clauses as well as performance data from their operational systems.
Great. Okay.
Sorry, I just answered a very simple question in a very long way. My guides generally see that. So let me summarize. There are 3 ways you can do the integration. Light, which is you set up your metrics, and then you can define who is supposed to enter performance information. It could be the supplier, it could be the supplier rep, it could be somebody in operations, and then the graphs pop out automatically. The second is to have a real-time connection. So your operational data can do the same feed, and you compare it against your contract values. And then the third is to use our supplier portal, and then have a supplier enter their own performance information, and that will tell them and you how they are doing against their contracts.
Then can you actually take that and use it to forecast potential risk and the data that you have historically and forecast potential risk?
You can, or we can. We don't pretend to be, I'll say, a risk-forward kind of shop.
Okay.
But all of the performance data that we have, we make available so that you can predict future challenges.
Okay, great. I'm going to follow back on a comment you made about the engineering, diagrams being difficult. For IACCM, one of the big things that we're talking about now is around contract design and visualization, making contracts easier to read. You put them in charts, you put them, maybe in flows or something like that, that makes the user the intended beneficiaries of these contracts. The ones that are actually supposed to be using them day to day actually want to use them and make it clear and easy for them to use. So do you think that some people have raised a concern around visualization, maybe making it harder for AI to extract data, whereas I guess I always see it as actually making it easier. You take a lot of complex text and making it simpler by maybe simplifying it and then putting it in chart form and making it clearer to pull. So are there things that as people are doing visualization that they might want to consider with automation in the future in mind?
Now, that's a great data point. And I think, as we look at the increased visualization for the contract flow, and I've seen contracts put together in PowerPoint, as sort of predecessors to the initiatives that we're seeing at IACCM. One of the challenges that it does present to the AI tool is not necessarily the ability to read the text when presented. The challenge is getting the text, so to speak, out of that user-friendly display and in a format that the AI engine can read. So one of the requirements or suggestions I would make for anybody who is heading down the visualization space is, think about making sure your text is always XML, and it sort of gets into the weeds here. But XML provides a level of portability for the content, so you can change how it is displayed. At the same time, it can be very easily read by a platform, and then it has the added benefit, as a standard anyway, to being the basis for most online publishing venues. So if you keep the meat of the text as XML, it makes it a little bit easier for all parties The only challenge is the folks who are doing the contract formatting need to be a little more cognizant of some basic rules. But if they do that, everybody's happy.
That's great. Okay. So your platform in particular, a question was can the platform connect to the Oracle e-business suite?
Yes, it can. Really, it's a very specific question. So Oracle e-business is the e-procurement side of Oracle ERP, and yes, it can.
Fantastic. Okay. We still have a few questions.
Okay.
Let's see. What proportion of functional departments create and monitor, manage their own contracts versus having legal, finance, or sourcing do that? I mean, do you have data for that?
Oh my goodness.
Based on what you've seen?
Somebody's writing a research report, I could tell. I'd have to mine it a little bit better. I can tell you which departments are the departments that usually are. I'm just trying to think what percentage of overall contracts. Certainly we see procurement and sales are the two that are more likely to manage their own contracts. Vast proportionate there would be procurement. Right? In many organizations, procurement have their own repository world, and oftentimes their contracts have been, I don't want to say managed, but they've been stored associated with their e-procurement platforms. Oftentimes, and not to be critical, but the storage for procurement teams is often rudimentary, and it's just a notch above being in a file cabinet. The tags are very rarely there. Obligation management is not as good as I'd like to see it from an industry perspective. But again, trying not to answer a short question with a long answer, across departments or across any given organization, it is typically the procurement team that manages their own contracts the most. Sales is probably the second organization to manage, contract volume in any way, shape, or form. The sole exception to that would be Treasury. Treasury may have contracts that they share with nobody, but it's a very small volume. The rest, by and large, will float out and get managed by central contract, central legal.
I see that as well. Let's see. So
I was going to ask you, at HP, HPE, and the three iterations, did you find that supply chain managed their own, or at least kept their own, and then sales is more likely to have that shared with finance because of revenue recognition requirements?
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think it depends on what we mean by create, manage, and monitor. So certainly I've seen both at HPE and lots of our members that I've met in the last 6 months is that there are different groups that retain, that create documents. And then I think this question was create, monitor, and manage. And so in terms of who monitors and manages, usually it is business operations or sales operations or somebody who's in that delivery capability versus more of the legal and legal department. But in terms of who and sourcing and others who are responsible for contract management post-contract, much more involved in that. But in terms of what proportion, I actually will go back into kind of our IACCM database and see if I can find that information, because it seems like that's something that we might actually have in terms of the benchmarks that we've done. So I will actually reply back to the individual that asked the question.
Okay, and you guys your benchmark database is absolutely outstanding. Tremendous source of reference for everyone.
Thank you. So if you're able to share, what percentage of your clients use the platform for procurement, and what, is procurement versus sales, product versus services, do you have that type of data? And if you don't have it top of mind, we can, certainly provide you, another avenue to provide that.
Sure. I can probably provide that a little bit more offline, because my first question would be, is the question procurement alone or procurement and other functions, right? So we are generally
that's true.
So a very high percentage of our user base does use us for procurement, among others, but we are generally multi-domain.
Okay. Okay.
Besides, this wasn't supposed to be about Ultria. It was supposed to be about digitization of contracts.
That is true. That is true. But the people are curious about your software. So
no issue.
okay, so I think we have a few minutes left, and so just what advice would you give someone who is just really thinking about implementing a CLM technology in terms of things that they should do internally to prepare for that process? Let's say someone who has lots of contracts in lots of places, a lot of these data points. Usually, what would you advise somebody to think about as they're thinking of implementing or selecting a CLM system?
Perfect. I think I would, before even selecting a CLM, I would maybe take a step backwards and really take 3 metrics or 3 measurement points. Step 1 is figure out 1 year from now, how would you measure whether or not you've been successful in implementing a CLM? So what is it that's going to make a project successful in terms of, is it to get everything under one roof? Is it to understand where you're leaking revenue? Is it to take advantage of discounts that you've left on the table from a supply chain perspective? Identify a couple of those key business drivers up front so you know why you're doing this, because you're not going to do this by yourself. Which gets you to your second point. Who are the other key stakeholders? Right? So you may be the contract professional du jour. You may be the change agent, but how do you solicit the support of folks with money? Okay, so you're looking at getting IT on board to support a technology decision, getting key stakeholders around your sales operations or your procurement operations or finance and treasury. What's in it for them? What are their value points? And how will they look back a year from now and say, I made the right decision to support Peggy on her quest? And then the third is create that value proposition in your head for both what you think you need and for what your stakeholders think they need. And paint a very realistic path that includes what I'll call the 3 easies. You need ease of adoption, ease of use, and ease of information. So the number 1 failure that we've seen on previous contract lifecycle rollouts is that key stakeholders did not engage. They did not bring their teams online. They found it difficult, arduous, one more step. They either didn't understand or weren't willing to take that leap to say, if I add 10% more data up front, I'll have a better solution in a year. And as we've worked with these organizations, and some of them were on their 3rd or 4th CLM implementation when we sort of signed them up as customers, we realized that it's okay to minimize the change to people's day in, day out way of working. So when we look at how Ultria CLM is deployed, and today wasn't a demo, today was talking about a very specific area, but for legal professionals, we have a connector to Microsoft Word that automatically saves versions in the cloud, does automatic redline comparisons, gives you workflow, and gives you your template and your clause library all from within Microsoft Word. So Counsel doesn't have to change the tools they use. It's the tools they use plus all this extra stuff. They're happy. Your Salesforce users, your heads down, high volume sales guys, we bolt directly into Salesforce. There's an extra button that generates an agreement. That's it. No change to those guys. They're happy. Their management is happy. The rank and file folks who are looking for the occasional non-disclosure or, hey, I need an agreement to buy something, give them an intranet portal. Or even better, we have a patent pending plugin. That's good alliteration there, patent pending plugin, for Microsoft Outlook. So I can take an intranet RPA portal, a wizard-based portal, and push it into the sidebar in Microsoft Outlook. the rank and file, the typical employee just thinks they're sending an email when really they're giving you pre-formatted data that the system will generate a best first draft. Make it easy for them to use. It makes it incredibly easy for them to adopt, and that removes your top hurdle. So as individuals or as companies or teams are looking at an enterprise CLM, once you've done those first two things, you know why you want to do it and you've quantified it, you've built an understanding of why your other stakeholders are going to be on board and you've got them rallied, look for a solution that helps you ease for adoption, ease of use, and then ease of information. Helps you get to that stage 4, stage 5 of integration with your operational systems. So the question that came up on Oracle e-business. You want someone who says, oh yeah, Oracle e-business, sure, PeopleSoft, sure, JDE, sure, SAP Cloud, SAP HANA, yes, 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 and we do this through web services, right? We don't need to see a CLM budget of X and then a systems integration budget of 5 times X to be able to true up so I can do a risk analysis on my contracts. Yep. It should be much more manageable and containable. So that's my recommendation, and it's not just because of who we are. It's because that's what has been successful in the market today.
Absolutely, and I think those are fantastic, because I do think that adoption, certainly as you think about how you plan for it, how do you make it as easy for the intended user, and then how do you help them adopt this, making it as simple and as part of their current process as possible is absolutely key. And if your processes are already very, very complicated today, perhaps taking the first step of simplifying those before you automate would probably make your life a lot easier.
And it is about making your life easier.
Yes, absolutely. So Arthur, thank you so much for leading us through this very informative session on the value of leveraging your existing contracts using CLM technology. My thanks to everyone who joined us as well. I hope you found it to be useful and that you have a fantastic rest of the day. This concludes our webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you.